Senator Craig has been waiting patiently. Senator Steinberg, you want to jump in here?
Is that okay? To leave in a couple of minutes. But again, Mr. Chairman, I appreciate you allowing me to sit in on the committee, and I'm, as the leader of the House, I'm obviously wrestling with a whole host of things, including scheduling and when a vote ought to be considered on this matter. And in listening to Senator Simitian and the other senators, whether or not time matters here depends in part on how one views the context of the project. Because on the one hand, I could make the argument that all facts are pretty well known, and the issue is framed very well. And as Senator Simitian said at one point in his comments or questions, reasonable people can differ. There is a risk. We don't have the guaranteed federal funding. We don't. And, you know, President Obama may or may not win re-election. I know what I hope for. The Congress may or may not decide to appropriate the money next session for the extension or not. I think it's also fair, though, to point out that there's also risk and an opportunity cost in not appropriating the dollars now as well, because we won't get any federal money now, and we won't know whether or not we would get subsequent appropriations. So that's one context. Another context, though, is to say, well, time matters if, in fact, we still have work to do that condition the appropriation of this money on things that make my good colleagues here and others feel more comfortable. And so that, of all the things I've heard in my limited time here, there's two things, Mr. Richard, you said that I want to focus on, because you said that on behalf of the administration, that the administration is open to, I'll paraphrase, not your words, reasonable conditions. You can't commit to conditions you don't know about, but reasonable, enforceable conditions. And you also said, and this just makes sense, that in the first year or two or even 3 years, if we grant this appropriation, the administration isn't going to spend all the money right away. Just not going to do it. You have till 2017, and there's been some talk about some additional flexibility beyond that, and we're in 2012 now. So it begs really the question that maybe not, is a pathway here towards more comfort and resolution. And that is, whenever we consider an appropriation here, what would be your view, and what would you suggest be the process that would define goals and timetables by which the money would only be allocated in a self-executing way? I don't think you're going to agree to come back to the legislature for increments, but in a self-executing way to say that if X condition is not met by 2014, then the whole $2.7 billion is in fact not going to be appropriated. Because I think you get where I may be going here, because the fear, and this is, you know, partly inherent tension between a legislative branch of government and an executive branch of government, which is, you want the money for a good public purpose, and you're saying we're going to do it right. And you know what, as individuals, I believe in all of you sitting here knowing you. But that's, you know, not quite good enough for a number of my colleagues here, because we're all, we all have term limits, and we all go on to do other things. And our oversight is only meaningful if we control the purse strings, and you're asking us to give up the big part, at least the big part of the purse strings. So is there a pathway here towards resolution? And I'm thinking of Senator Simitian-Lowenthal and DeSaulnier specifically. We have 22 other colleagues in the caucus and 15 members of the Republican caucus, and so everyone will cast a vote on this. But can we condition parts of the $2.7 billion on the authority meeting specified goals and timetables after 2012, 2013?
Senator Steinberg, I believe that we can. My colleague, Mr. Rossi, believes that we can. The one thing that we need to do, which is only to say it, not to suggest that it's going to be something I come back and say, oh, gee, this doesn't work, is we have to work with our federal funding partners because we have specific contractual measures with them. But having said that, I don't see that that is going to end up being a limitation. I mean, clearly, if we were a construction project developer going to a bank seeking a construction loan, there would be release points based on progress, and so I think that that's the direction that you're going here.
It would be enforceable. In other words, if not by the legislature, by a private citizen, by...
Respectfully, I think this is a constructive conversation, first of all. But this has been our challenge in the past. Senator Lowenthal, along with our Republican colleague on the Budget Subcommittee, have crafted language. We said we need to see a plan by such and such a date. The plan came back, and it was just barely a response and an improvement over the previous one. And again, history, different partners,
right.
But we have had, and I think Senator Lowenthal will bear me out on this, we have had to drag people kicking and screaming to compliance with every item in the agenda.
Now, if I have the floor, hold on. It's one thing when you're talking about a business plan. Got it. You know, a business plan, the business plan was not tied in a legal way, in a legal way to the actual appropriation of money. So I'm talking about something different. I'm talking about the appropriation.
Respectfully, we did in fact condition the release of certain funds on the delivery of certain products. And I am here to tell you that when those products arrived, they arrived in the most half-baked form that someone thought would be good enough to get them their dollars. And I don't think any objective observer, including the Legislative Analyst's Office, would tell you otherwise, because I remember where the Legislative Analyst sat when they said, yeah, it's just barely good enough to meet the criteria.
But then we learn from the past here in drafting enforceable obligations. I mean, you mentioned, for example, Senator Simitian, and I was listening mostly just as I was thinking about the concern you have about a particular direction that the authority might go on the peninsula. And you asked specifically for some assurances, real assurances, that that direction wouldn't be taken. All right. My challenge to you here is how would you build that into an enforceable obligation that says X amount of the money does not get out unless that condition is met?
Right. And I think, Senator, both the senators, you know, respecting the fact that there has been this history, and that, as you said, Senator Simitian, once burned, twice shy, and not knowing the specifics that you're referring to, but it did sound to my ear that you were talking about something that might have had more subjective criteria. In other words, a report was delivered to you, and to use your words, it just barely did X or Y. I think what Senator Steinberg is challenging us on would be the creation of objective criteria, where there's no interpretation. We either got to some point or we didn't.
Are we talking about now saying, you know, obviously we've talked about what keeps us up at night and not keeps us up at night. And so what we're talking about is some kind of additional financial resources coming to this project. Could we condition it that money is spent over time, if we could come, that once we reach a point where there are no additional resources coming, that we would reevaluate our position?
Can I suggest that, with respect, what I'd like to do is work with the committee. I'm not sure I'm feeling all that comfortable negotiating.
Let's not negotiate it here, but but maybe this is an open door here.
Could I ask you a question, Senator? From a financial perspective, the issue of plans and all of those type of things are so subjective, you would never predicate a disbursement of money against
Okay.
a plan.
But
But if we set up, and I don't know if we can do this, I'd have to take a harder look with Jeff, but just like any commercial construction loan, you have to hit certain performance points to get your next disbursement. You have to hit certain before you get your next disbursements. That's fairly straightforward. It's very objective. It's easy to audit. I don't know if we could do that, but that would be preferable to try to sit around and figure out how we would do a bunch of subjective reporting that
Right.
Well,
tie
the issue of outreach, for one, I don't think you deny has been a problem in the organization's 3.5-year history. I don't think you deny that it needs improvement going forward. Now, we can ask you to bring an outreach plan to us, but it'll be pretty subjective whether or not it does or doesn't meet the expectations of any one member or the committee. And frankly, even if it does meet everyone's expectations, it won't be worth much if it isn't implemented successfully. That doesn't mean there's not some value, Senator Steinberg, in putting the condition, even if it is subjective, into the conditions of approval. That, at least in years past, forced people to come forward with their, all due respect, half-baked proposal, and it allowed us to say, it's half-baked, please try again. And to your comments earlier, I think we have actually seen a better plan evolve through that iterative process, as painful as it's been for everyone. I also think, Senator Steinberg, to your point, there are objective criteria that could be used as well. So I think there is promise here, but my point is, that's not, all of that is not going to get, I mean, the issue, the single small issue in some minds of how are we going to deal with this pending environmental impact report reference to a mega project up and down the San Francisco Peninsula has been hanging out there for 13 months. I'm open to a solution, but that's just one. Now, there are hundreds of other issues that will be appropriately of importance to people up and down the state. Those need to be hammered out before we say yes, because once we say yes, there will not be all that much interest in accommodating the concerns of the legislature.
Well, I would respectfully disagree with that last comment.
Gentlemen, absent the power of the purse, excuse me, Senator Steinberg, absent the power of the purse, your organization has shown no interest historically in getting to yes with the legislature.
We're the turnaround team,
I am
Senator.
very clear that if we don't get these conditions in writing, again, with an assurance from the administration that they are not only acceptable, but will not be tampered with by way of a line-item veto, that we should not count on them. That has been our bitter personal experience sitting in this role, working with this organization.
I was happy to cede the floor to Senator Simitian. I was happy to. And now I want it back.
The chair
just for a second.
considering granting that.
Just,
Go ahead, Senator Steinberg.
just so I'm clear, though, on my so that they're not, I am talking about written, enforceable, objective conditions as part of the legislative act of appropriating the money. And that may not be perfect, but I think it is worthwhile to see if we might really look at goals and it's really goals and timetables is what it is.
Right. That's
Now,
exactly
I don't know, and I know you don't want to get into this here, and maybe we shouldn't. I don't know if that ultimately addresses Senator Lowenthal's seminal question about future funding commitment from the federal government. I don't know that it does, and we don't have to talk about that. We don't have to go into that right now. But let's get to work right away on defining what may be objective conditions, at least as it applies to every single district-related area and every goal and timetable that you say that you can deliver.
We're happy to work with you on that. I think just so long as you don't set up something where, say, the state controller judges the sufficiency of our product, we're fine.
Bad joke.
Yes, I understand.
And if you fail, there goes your stipend. There goes your stipend. That's $100 a month.
If I could maybe jump in, between now and the next two hearings, there's an opportunity, I think, for our staff, the committee staff, your staff, and us collectively to work on, and we can work with the pro tem staff and his office, to see if we can actually come up with something that will help to frame the issue in a way that all of us can get to a point where we feel more comfortable about this. Having said that, we haven't heard from Senator Correa, and we still have federal obligations that we have to, are always constrained by Senator Correa.